Some wars made it into books, others into monuments. But some, the deepest ones, live in silence, erased from lessons, faded from maps. In 1818, two African kingdoms stood face to face, not to resist colonizers, not to beg, but to test legacy, power, and pride. This was no tribal skirmish. This was a clash of rulers, of traditions, of ancestors. This is Voices of the Forgotten, where truth echoes louder than textbooks. Drums build beneath black screen, flashes of bronze, chains, burning maps, symbols of Benin and Yoruba culture fading in. Two nations, one storm coming. Across the deep green forests of West Africa, before the names Nigeria or British Protectorate even existed, two ancient empires carved themselves into the earth. Benin, Akure. These weren't tribes. These were sovereign nations, with kings, laws, spiritual courts, military records, art that stunned the world and still can't be replicated. Benin, the blade of the empire. Benin was mighty. Founded over 1,000 years ago, crowned by the Oba dynasty, its warriors were feared, its art desired by kings. Its cities were so well organized that early Portuguese explorers called it one of the most beautiful and cleanest places in the world. Yet, Benin was more than court grace. It was an empire builder. From the 15th to 19th century, Benin expanded, asserting influence over smaller towns and polities, demanding loyalty in the form of tribute, recognition of Oba supremacies, military support. If you paid, you stayed protected. If you refused, history would remember you in screams. Akure, the shrine we didn't shut down. Now we turn east, where the sun rises over today's Ondo state. There lies Akure, a famously proud Yoruba state, born from the lineage of Oduduwa, the revered father of the Yoruba people. Akure was no vast empire, but it was rich in something Benin deeply respected: spiritual authority. Ruled by the Deji, Akure was a town of sacred peace pacts, metalworking mastery, babalaos and shrines that shocked even outsiders, oral traditions that guarded prophecy, pride, and honor. The Deji Arakale in 1818, a thoughtful ruler, faced a decision that defined his kingdom for centuries. Would he bow, or remind Benin that Akure bent to no throne? When words fail, the trigger is disputed, as most true acts of war are. Some say a Benin emissary was insulted *** at the Akure palace, a brutal act of dishonor. Others say Akure refused to continue tribute, breaking a century-old unspoken status with Benin. And some whisper something deeper: that Akure's rising spiritual and regional influence had become a threat. That soldiers weren't just sent for diplomacy. They were sent to erase competition. Whatever the truth, one fact is clear. In early 1818, the Oba of Benin, Oba Ozumwend, gave the command: restore respect, or restore it in blood. The long march to conquest. Benin's army didn't just patrol, it marched through time. For weeks, soldiers broke earth eastward, accompanied by elite command units, spiritual cult members, and sacred war banners. They moved through Igbara, Ijer, little villages now long forgotten, burning those who resisted, sparing those who bowed, sending messages ahead: make peace, or prepare your burial cloths. News reached Akure within days. Crowds panicked. The Deji summoned his chiefs, commanders, and spiritual leaders. Shrines were activated. Talks with neighboring towns failed. There was no turning back. Benin would not be bribed, or delayed, or denied. Drums of war intensify subtly in the background. The siege of Akure. Picture the city. Royal guards dressed in ceremonial war regalia. Women chanting in corners, praying to Ogun, Esu, Oya. Smithies forging new tools. Youths ready to fight, or die. As Benin's troops breached the western gates, chaos erupted. Fires blazed. Horns screamed across the skyline. Akure defenders stood gallantly. but they were outgunned and tactically overwhelmed. Benin's soldiers fought like a wall, unrelenting, precise. They systematically boxed out each quarter, cutting supply lines, pushing captives ahead to demoralize defenders. The battle lasted multiple days, some say weeks. Akure's palace fell. Shrines were ransacked. Resistance collapsed. And the Deji. He was seized, shackled, and marched, not killed in battle, but as a public prize, back to Benin. Chapter 5, The Long Road. To a short judgment. They took him, alive, bound, silenced. The king of Akure. Deji Arakale, a ruler devoted to tradition, law, and the spiritual guardians of his people, was now a prisoner. Marched hundreds of miles in shackles back to Benin City, his presence was more than symbolic. He had defied an Oba. And the Oba needed the world to witness what happens to defiance. Arriving in the capital, he was paraded. Not as a guest. Not as a diplomat. But as a conquest. In a kingdom where kings were considered near divine. To kill a king publicly was not just punishment. It was ritual annihilation. And so, the verdict was final. Deji Arakale was executed. Some say he was beheaded. Others whisper about ceremonial rituals held before death. Whatever the method, one thing was true. From that moment on, Akure would never be the same. When the city went silent, the siege was over. But the silence lasted years. Across Akure, old women wept by broken shrines. Young warriors wandered, ashamed not of defeat, but of survival. The Deji's court was in ashes. Sacred groves destroyed. Drums stopped. Masks buried. Rituals paused. To many in the sacred Yoruba world, Akure had lost more than a king. It had lost its axis. Neighbors feared association. Healing began only in whispers and chants. And in the spiritual realm, oracles like Ifa foretold that Akure's soul would have to wander for generations before full restoration. The price of defiance. For both sides, Benin had won. Militarily, politically, but spiritually, the war had touched something untouchable. Reports suggest Benin priests felt a shift. Oracle readings darkened. The expansionist campaigns slowed down in coming decades. Because wars like 1818 took more than land. They altered cosmic order. And for Benin, its grandeur peaked around this era, before colonialism fractured even the strongest African governments. Both kingdoms paid a price. Akure lost its king. Benin lost its momentum. And the Yoruba world watched, learned, retreated. The forgotten story. Now ask yourself, how do we not learn this in school? No movies. No books in class. No memorial plaques on a global stage. We learn about Napoleon. About George Washington. About Julius Caesar. But where is the epic of Deji Arakale? Where is the oral-to-visual transmission of Oba of Benin's empire? We were raised on Shakespearean battles. French revolutions. Atlantic crossings. But not on our own war. On our own kings. On our own fallen, and the blood they gave so that kingdoms like Akure could rise again. This is why they call US tribes. They call it a tribal conflict. To make it sound small. But what do you call it when thousands of soldiers fought with elite tactics? Kingdoms exchanged tribute and negotiated boundaries. Sacred law was followed before actions of war were permitted. Kings were executed in state-sanctioned ceremonies. You call that a civilization? Two nations. A true African empire narrative. And that is what they don't want you to see. Because the lie goes, Africa before Europe was primitive. Simple. Peaceful. Barefoot and begging. But history screams otherwise. Akure survived. Despite invasion. Despite execution. Despite cultural desecration. Akure slowly rebuilt. Its monarchy, though fractured, was reinstated decades later. Its sacred groves, reblessed. Its shrines, restored. its people. Stronger in collective pride. And today, Arakale Road in Akure bears the name of the king they tried to erase. Not in shame, but in sovereignty. His name whispers through every marketplace, through every mother's story, through every Yoruba heart that refuses to let history dilute itself. Benin, too, survives, glory still alive in the walls of the Oba's palace, in the rhythms of Edo festivals, and in the bronzes stolen but not forgotten. The war destroyed much, but it built the foundation of memory. Why we remember. They feared the story, so they erased it. But here's the truth. Africa didn't wait for Europeans to make it civilized. It had leaders, diplomats, laws, empires, wars, loss, victory. Africa didn't begin in chains. Africa didn't begin in 1884. Africa didn't begin in colonization. And history, it did not begin, nor end, in Europe. When Benin marched on Akure in 1818, it reminded the world of one thing. We were building futures. Before they came to sell us their version of one.